this morning. I knew this was going to be popular, and it is. So this is going to be amazing. We're just going to get everybody in, and we'll get some announcements going here in just a couple seconds. Thank you. I love it when we always have just a few that keep their camera on, and it's just so nice to see faces. I appreciate that. So there are actually people out there. That's great. Okay. So before I introduce our presenter, I just realized I didn't come up with a code word. We've got to come up with a code word. Let's just do, how about if our code word for today is divergent, just because it works, right? That's what we're going to be talking about. So divergent, I will put that in the chat, and I'll put it in a couple of times so that you guys make sure you have that. But I also just want to welcome you. This is going to be an amazing conversation. Marianna and I have talked about this already, really wanting a real, what was the word you used? A robust conversation. And so I think this is going to be such great information for all of us. As reminders, we're excited that you're here. We want you to be a part of this. You can ask questions. We just were talking about how if you want to put that in the Q&A, your questions, just so that they're kind of separate from the chat. You guys are all so great about adding comments and suggestions and helping each other in that chat. And sometimes the questions can get a little lost. I mean, I'll still watch, but if you put it in that Q&A, then they're right there ready to go. And so maybe think about that just to make it a little more easy. But also as a reminder, at the very end of the presentation, we will put the evaluation in, like the last 15 minutes or so. It's a link. All you have to do is click on it and fill out that evaluation that needs to be submitted in order to get your CEUs. If you have to go right away, or if it's not working where you're at, some places, people where they work, it kind of blocks that. You can save that link and just make sure you get it sent in before Friday at about 4 o'clock, because then it shuts down and you can't get into it after that. If you have any difficulties, get a hold of Gabby. Hi, Gabby. I'll put her email in the chat as well. It's also in your flyer email that we send out. So get a hold of her if you're having some tech issues, and she can help you with that. But again, our code word for today is divergent, and Gabby is the one that you'll want to email that to if you lose connection, and she'll get you back in. I think we've done all the basics. So I want to give Marianna as much time as possible. So this is Marianna Henry. Actually, she was recommended to me by somebody else who said, you need to have her. You need to have her as a presenter. And so we got on a Zoom and we talked, and wow, we're so excited. We had a great conversation, and I think we both share the concern and the importance of this subject. And so she's got great experience with this. And so I think that you're going to come away with some amazing information and how to work with this population. So I'm going to turn the time over to Marianna Henry, and we'll go from there. Enjoy, everybody.
Thank you for that marvelous introduction, Kelly. Hello, I'm Marianna Henry. I am going to share my slides now, and we will go from there. Thumbs up just to see. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's in presenter.
Great.
Mode,
oh, it's showing the entire screen. That's silly. Yeah. Let's see if I can just do this. How's that?
Perfect. You got it.
Wonderful. Fantastic. Thank you for mentioning that. All right. So I'm going to kick things off with just a little introduction of myself. Kelly did a great job, but I would just love to share with you all a little bit more about my experience, and just about me, right? Because this is a 2-hour conversation and it may be vulnerable, and we may disclose things to one another. So I'm just going to kick that off. So I am Marianna Henry. I have a Master's of Professional Studies in Sociology and Nonprofit Organization. And I'm an associate certified coach through the International Coaching Federation, kind of the gold standard of the coaching profession globally. I'm working on the next level credential, which is a PCC, professional certified coach. Hopefully in the next couple of months, it'll be done. I'm also a Gallup certified strengths coach. So if you've heard of Clifton Strengths, that's what that is. I'm a first generation Polish American. I'm originally from Grand Rapids, Michigan. If you need someone to speak Polish to, you got me. And I've been in the Salt Lake area in Utah for the last 16 years. I spent 14 years in higher education at Utah Valley University. And then about a year and a half ago, I decided to go full time in my private coaching practice where I offer ADHD and executive function coaching. And then I supplement that with career and academic coaching just because of my background. So owner, MH Success Coaching. I also founded the Utah ADHD Collective last year. It's currently an LLC because founding a nonprofit takes a lot of extra work. And so I'm slowly rolling that piece out. And what I'm hoping the Utah ADHD Collective does is bring together a network of providers, organizations, anyone working with the ADHD population in the state of Utah, because we don't know what the other is doing. We don't know one another necessarily. And so I want to create a network for all of us, as well as a place for people with ADHD, their families, to be able to easily find the resources and the support that they need, kind of a one-stop shop. So it's also an advocacy piece, all of that. So that's new. And then I'm also can you tell I have ADHD? I'm also the president currently of the International Coaching Federation High Country chapter, which includes Utah and then 5 additional states in the US in the High Country area. I'm also a trainer for JST Coaching and Training, which is really a pioneering organization for coaching young adults and youth with ADHD and executive dysfunction, and the Boulder Way Forward movement here in Utah. That elevates women and girls, right? Trying to move that needle for women and girls in the state. I'm the Neurodiversity Impact Team lead on that. So gosh, I spend a lot of time in this space. I was diagnosed 2 years ago with ADHD. My partner has ADHD. I have children with ADHD and autism. And so I come from this as a parent and a partner and my own lived experience, as well as someone who spent the last 5 to 6 years doing this work every single day. And I love sharing all of this info with folks and having these conversations and building that awareness and understanding. All right, that was quite a bit. So let's continue. Today's agenda, just to give folks a heads up, we'll cover a lot about neurodiversity itself and executive functioning within that. We'll discuss how to shift our approach with clients, with students, with whoever we're working with, to accommodate, neurodivergence, but also to kind of come at things from that aspect of universal design, where we don't necessarily just have to constantly shift our approach. How do we just shift our entire approach, not based on who we're working with or who's right in front of us or a diagnosis necessarily? We will have a bio break. I'm hoping that's okay, Kelly. I didn't check with you, but we'll have a 5-minute bio break around the hour mark. And then from there, we'll dive into some of my favorite tools and resources. Some are my own that I've developed, and some are from other researchers in the neurodiversity space. And then we will do a Q&A for a good 15 minutes at the end as well. And I will have a handout for you all at the end, as well as some additional resources too. I really, really want to welcome folks to be as open as they'd like to be. You do not have to share what you don't want to share. But I'm just kind of giving, everyone a heads up to keep it a safe and kind and compassionate space for everyone. There are neurodivergent folks in this room, in this virtual room. And so we want to just be careful how we're talking about this topic today, and make sure everyone feels included and welcome to be here. But yes, we want that openness as well. So before we get to this question, I don't think that I'm able to create a poll. So I'm just going to ask folks to put in the chat, and this is gonna, I mean, there's a lot of people here, so this is gonna fly very quickly, but I'm really curious to just get a gauge for where we are in terms of how well versed you feel when we say neurodiversity. How well versed do you feel? Scale of 1 to 5. 1 is like nada, nothing. 5 is like, Marianna, I could be the one facilitating and developing this workshop. So 1 to 5, how well versed are you in neurodiversity? An 8, I love that. Okay. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of, 3 through 5s, but there are some of those 2s. And I wouldn't expect anything less from the people in this room, right? I'm expecting that that we'll see a lot of 2s and above. Keep them coming. I love seeing this. I don't even know how many people have posted at this point. Scale of 1 to 5.
Scale of 1 to 5.
1 to 5. Okay. Okay. So, I didn't see very many 1s. I've done this kind of question before in other workshops and I've seen 0s, right? But that might have been from a coach who's never worked, with any neurodivergent clients or had an awareness that they were neurodivergent. And didn't necessarily have the training around that. Miriam, take that back then, 2. LOL, wrong scale. So yes, 1 to 5, not a 1 to 10 scale. So thank you for responding to that. I just wanted to have an idea. Some of you may feel like some of this information is redundant. And if so, I apologize, but we do want to kind of get to some of the basics, when we do the overview. But hopefully you'll also learn a lot of new information as well. So my next question to you, and you're welcome to put this in the chat. I don't mind hearing from maybe 2 to 3 folks, but I will kind of have to cut people off so we can keep moving forward. So if you want to speak up, please, hand raise and I'll get to 2 to 3 people, but also in the chat, how do you define neurodiversity? I'm so sorry. Every time I try to pull open the Zoom information, it clicks me to the next slide. How do you define neurodiversity? And you're welcome to raise a hand if you'd like to speak up.
I don't know if I'm going to be able to see a hand if they raise it.
Okay, yeah, I should be able to. Well, yeah, it
Yeah.
usually pulls people like up,
Yeah, I hope it does.
and forward if they're raising their hand. The digital hand. Okay, so I'm seeing different ways people use their brains. Yeah, thinking outside of mainstream thinking patterns, respecting everyone's nervous systems, learning differently, different disorders in the brain. Yeah, what else? Diverse functioning. Hi, JC. I used to work with JC at UVU. Different methods of processing. We're cooler. Great. Change from the normal, but deserves, right, to have a place. Lovely. Is anyone willing to speak up and share their thoughts on how they define neurodiversity? Yeah, Kelly, I'm not seeing hands raised either, so it might just be that there are no hands raised, and that's okay. I'll kind of finish off with Mike's comment there. Essentially, it's an acknowledgement that though we clinically use terms like developmental disorder, it's a way of normalizing that brains work in a variety of ways and they're not necessarily disordered. It's a normalizing term. Yeah, lovely. Yep. And we will be talking plenty about the language that we use around this, right? For sure. Okay, I am going to move the chat over so I can still see it without having to constantly click. Okay, so here we go, moving into definitions of neurodiversity, where they came from, who they came from, and then really diving into truly kind of where we're at in the current time around neurodiversity and how much that has shifted in 20, 30 years. So actually, I'm going to go back really quick and just share that, neurodiversity, much like what a lot of people have said in the chat, it really is the range of differences in individual brain function and behavioral traits. And it is a part of normal variation in the human population. And we'll get into like some data and numbers that explain why we're still divergent, right? Versus just a normal part of the human brain variation. So the term neurodiversity was coined by an Australian autistic sociologist named Judy Singer. And it really came from a thought that, we need biodiversity, for example, in our ecosystem for a flourishing planet, flourishing ecosystem. It's the same with the human ecosystem. We need the neurodiversity for a flourishing human ecosystem. And the term neurodivergent, however, and neurodivergence, those came from an American autism rights activist named Cassiane Asasumasu. And there's been some like tussle between like, oh, did Judy really coin it, or did Cassiane coin it, or whatever. So that's where I leave it, is that Judy did the neurodiversity piece, Cassiane did the neurodivergence and neurodivergent piece. But both of those came about in the late 90s, early 2000s, around the turn of the century. And both of those terms really came out of the autism rights movement and community, primarily like the online autism rights movement and community. And so now, 25 years later, right, we're seeing so many more things fall under those umbrellas as terms. We also now might hear other ways to describe neurodivergence: neurominority, neurovariant, neurocomplex. The TikTok world brought us neurospicy. And so you may hear terms like that. You may hear clients use terms like that to describe themselves. And then when we look at, the other side of the language, we have neurotypical, which is really just a person group of people who has the dominant neurocognitive, neurodevelopmental, quote unquote, wiring, and the, again, quote unquote, expected presentation of society. And then when we talk about neuronormative, which you'll hear me use as well, it's very much that social set of norms, standards, expectations, ideals, behaviors, etc., that center a particular way of functioning as the correct way or the right way in society. So just giving you that context of where we'll be going from here. But in terms of many of the neurodevelopmental or neurodivergent conditions that we'll be talking about, research really supports a genetic component, and that can be in addition to environmental and neurobiological and neurodevelopmental factors. So there is no one answer to like, well, where did this come from and why? It's still being researched, and there are a lot of variables involved. So the next few slides that I'm going to share come from an amazing person in Australia. Yet again, Australia is like booming when it comes to neurodiversity. It's pretty amazing. So this person's name is Sunny Jane Wise, Sonny, and they are an Australian trans, neurodivergent, and disabled public speaker, advocate, author, educator, a lot of different titles, and they are at lived experience educator on Instagram, for example. And I will see that attribute on their slides as well. I follow Sunny. I really like what they have to offer. They've created an amazing like DBT workbook for neurodivergent folks. Like there's so much good stuff coming from Sunny, and they are, I would call them a trailblazer in terms of the modern like neurodiversity movement. And you'll see what I mean by that as I go through some of Sunny's graphics. So has anyone heard of Sunny Jane Wise? You're welcome to raise a hand or just, yeah, I love Sunny. Wonderful person. You can follow them on LinkedIn as well. They have a website. So I've included that on my handout. So here we go. This is Sunny's most up-to-date neurodivergent umbrella. And you can see the asterisk, non-exhaustive list, right? There's only so many things we can fit on a graphic. And so what you can see here is, we have the commonly known kind of conditions like ADHD and autism, some of those learning disabilities, dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia are listed here. But what you can also see is there are so many other conditions listed under this umbrella as we look at it through a 2025 lens. And so we are seeing, anxiety and depressive disorders listed here. We are seeing highly sensitive people. We're seeing auditory or visual or sensory processing. We're seeing even acquired neurodivergence. Sometimes it's transient, but either way, anything that diverges from, again, that neuronormative neurotypical can fall under this umbrella. And if someone identifies as neurodivergent, welcome to the, to the group of us under the umbrella, right? And there's something to be said about even that self kind of diagnosis or self-labeling, and we'll talk about labels in a second as well. Honoring that, like, even if there isn't a diagnosis, if someone's lived experience, if someone's functioning is impacted by what we may think is some kind of neurodivergence or executive dysfunction, right? We still want to work with them regardless of if there's any sort of diagnosis as well. So neurodivergent umbrella. What we also see is that many of these conditions overlap, right? We see them as comorbid, coexisting, co-occurring. I prefer the term co-occurring. I don't like comorbidities. So, you may see things like autism and ADHD as co-occurring conditions. Those were not allowed to be diagnosed together until 2013. So it's really only been over the last decade that folks have been able to be diagnosed ADHD. And so if you feel like we're seeing more and more of that, that's probably why, because we can. And so we do know also that in terms of things like ADHD, anxiety disorders are the most frequent co-occurring conditions with ADHD, for example. So yes, so we know that a lot of these are on spectrums. Some people may need higher levels of support, others might need lower levels of support, but regardless, the neurodivergent umbrella is large. So and we will have a moment in a little bit to have a little bit of discussion, just letting you all know. I don't want to just lecture at you the whole time. Again, here's a wonderful graphic from Sunny. What is neurodiversity? Again, what people think it means, autism and ADHD and a list of medical diagnoses, but what it actually means is the diversity of human minds. And you can see Sunny has listed so many other manifestations of neurodiversity here. The ironic thing is that for this presentation, there is a bit of a focus for me on autism and ADHD because we do see so much more research for those conditions as neurodivergent conditions, as a part of that neurodiversity piece. Again, these movements, coming out of the autism space. So yeah, it's ironic that I'm sharing this and then I'm going to dive into like ASD stats and ADHD stats, but the conversation has to start somewhere, and it's nice to have something to kind of guide that. So here we go. This is one of my favorite things to come from Sunny. It's new, and it's the neurodiversity smorgasbord. It's an alternative way to understand neurodiversity and human differences beyond the DSM, beyond diagnostic labels. And so essentially, if you imagine you or a client having your plate, right? And these are all serving plates. At any given time, you can pull from each of these plates and create your own smorgasbord on your own plate. Different traits, altered states, your unique profile, as it says. And again, that can change. Yeah, and so as we talk about neuroplasticity and how we can kind of strengthen some of these areas in some ways, you may not pull that item off the plate anymore if you really figure out a way that works for you to kind of manage that. Something else may come onto the plate. But we're seeing that this goes far beyond just specific diagnostic criteria. So I really, really enjoy this graphic. And I know we don't have time to go through every single plate, but I wanted to share it with you. And again, this is where you can see how often symptoms manifest or overlap as well. Okie dokie, the neuronormativity onion. So when we talk about neuronormativity in society, right? This onion is a way, like it says, to understand the layers as well as the roots of neuronormativity. I'm doing a presentation at the International ADHD conference in a few weeks on consistency and productivity and what those words mean in our society, the roots, of those terms, and how they affect folks with ADHD, for example, and how internalized the guilt and the shame are from those concepts, right? So it's very similar here in terms of neuronormativity. We look at the pathology paradigm, the psychiatry, the DSM. When you start peeling back those layers, you see attitudes, beliefs, expectations, standards. That rolls right into control, punishment, and then it comes from a lot of roots based in colonialism. I would say, with the consistency productivity piece, that Puritan work ethic, right? Capitalistic ideals, white supremacy. And then we find that onion everywhere in our workplaces, in our education and therapy and healthcare and government and relationships. And that's why building this awareness and understanding is so important. Okie dokie. Final graphic here. Some of you may have heard this quote or have seen it kind of go around, make its rounds around social media. But it's talking about labels. And yes, the original quote comes from at OMG, I'm autistic AF. That's the original attribution, right? And so essentially it's, why do you need a label? And sometimes when I'm doing these kinds of workshops, I do get pushback about using labels. So here we are talking about like, we want to unlabel, but then also, but what about labels? And this explains it really well. So why do you need a label? Because there is comfort in knowing you are a normal zebra, not a strange horse, because you cannot find community with other zebras if you don't know you belong, and because it is impossible for a zebra to be happy or healthy spending its life feeling like a failed horse. That's it. We've seen the trend over the last couple of years, especially on social media, I would say, especially on TikTok, where everyone suddenly, I think I have ADHD, I think I might be autistic, I think, this and this and this diagnosis. Out of that, even though there's, it's a double-edged sword, there's a lot of negative things that can come out of that. The positive is that we saw more folks take their symptoms seriously, recognize that they're seeing these patterns that align with a label of some kind, and then actually getting diagnosed and potentially treated, getting that behavioral support that they might need. So there's positives that come out of that too. And it's all about like finding those other zebras. So I really love that quote. And I think that can help explain for a lot of people why a label is helpful. Even into adulthood, somebody getting an autism diagnosis at 72, right? It's not going to necessarily help with getting accommodations at work. It's not going to necessarily do much in other ways, but for them, it's the knowing and it's the belonging. Okay, here we go. Some discussion, right? So again, neurodivergence, and we'll talk a lot more about this today. Neurodivergence can show up and can manifest in many, many different ways. And so I'm very curious, based on your own experience in the work that you do or your personal life, and your own intersections and the intersections of your clients that you've seen. You're welcome to put this in the chat, and I'm happy for one or two people to share. How have you seen neurodivergence show up? Executive function deficits. Oh, we'll be talking executive function, Kylie. Yes.
I guess can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
I guess I just want to say to that, as an executive function specialist and doing work with people and somebody who has ADHD myself, I think that this is kind of when we went through the whole mental health awareness phase. It's like a lot of awareness, but not a lot of tools and not a lot of intervention. I feel similarly about executive function. People talk about it, they even can label it, but how to do it, like the coaching part of it or the compensating deficits, are rarely talked about, which impact, everything from your relations to your jobs to your things. So for me, once you see it, you can't unsee it. That's kind of how I feel about this.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for sharing, Kylie. Yeah. And that's why I love what I do, right? Because it's not just helping clients identify, what their needs are, but then diving into, okay, you've got the what, now it's the how and the when, and the trial and error and all of that. Yeah. And just that self-compassion, helping folks I mean, so much of what I do with my ADHD coaching, absolutely, we get into, strengthening those executive functions and other tools and strategies, but so much of it is also rebuilding confidence in themselves and trust in their own abilities. Because for a lot of neurodivergent people, which we'll talk about somewhere in here, there's a lot of more negative self-talk. They hear more negative messaging, right, over their lifetimes. And so climbing out of that can feel like 10 times harder. And so with the trial and error and with coming up with their own ways to be able to make things work for them, it really helps build that confidence and trust in their own abilities, because they start seeing the receipts, right? And they start being able to look back and say, but I did do this. Oh, I did do that. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Maybe one more person. How have you seen neurodivergence show up? Trying to see in the chat, sensory overstim, substance abuse. Ooh, that's one that I won't be talking about a ton, but we do know, for example, again, ADHD is my biggest specialty, but we do know, within ADHD, it is a much higher likelihood that someone with ADHD develops substance use disorder and self-medicates, right? But we do know that medication for ADHD does actually help prevent that. So yeah, just throwing that out there. Yes, sensory overstim, like we said, short-term memory issues between therapy sessions. Yes. Object permanence, connection, communication, overeating. Yep. That impulsivity, that dopamine seeking, emotional regulation. Yes. The lows in between hyperfixations. Oh boy. Hypermobility and POTS. Thank you, Ashley, for mentioning that. POTS is extremely common as a co-occurring condition. Ehlers-Danlos is another one, which is the hypermobility piece. I see it all the time in clients, colleagues, friends with neurodivergence. Yeah, more people being open about their experience, absolutely. And just speaking to the emotional regulation, for example, in the United States, emotional regulation is not part of the diagnostic criteria for ADHD, for example. It has become part of the diagnostic criteria in the European Union. There are folks right now working on updating the diagnostic criteria in the US, but who knows how long that will take. But we are seeing a shift towards recognizing just how big a piece emotional regulation is in ADHD, for example, and I would say in a lot of other conditions. Okay, thank you so much, everyone. I'm going to get through some data, some stats, and then we'll have a moment for questions and comments as well. So global and national neurodiversity stats. I do have little citations down at the bottom, but if you want more detail from those, the actual articles and things, you're always welcome to email me or message me and get that information. So the reasonable estimate of the global population that's neurodivergent is about 15 to 20%. It's very likely higher than that. We have a lot of underreporting and obviously different areas of the world who aren't, doing the research in the same way. But if we look at that number and we think about the umbrella, right, and the iceberg that we looked at, if we include all of those things as a part of neurodivergence, then this number could be 30, 40%, right? But even then, it's still a minority of the global population, even if it's just a different kind of neurotype, right? When we talk neuronormativity, the world is still set up in terms of success, in terms of progress. The world is still set up for the other 80% or 70% or 60%, right? So there's still that minority element to it for sure. The age range of women in which new ADHD diagnoses nearly doubled from 2020 to 2022 was 23 to 49. So it's adult diagnoses. And honestly, a lot of that came from during the time frame of the pandemic. And most of the increase that we saw in like ADHD related doctor visits came from women. But women and girls are still heavily underdiagnosed, under-researched, but we're making traction there. Let's see. This is a new stat just from, I don't know, like 4 or 5 months ago from the CDC. 15.5 million US adults have an ADHD diagnosis, with 50% diagnosed in adulthood. That's a good about 6% of the US adult population. And then this came from the University of California, but I think it's a pretty good measure of what we see in other higher education institutions, and maybe even, K through 12. But 21% of the students with disabilities that reported autism or ADHD, or students with disabilities out of that group, 21% of them reported autism or ADHD. 40% of them reported mental health conditions. And of course, I'm not sure how they calculated, co-occurring there. And then neurodivergent students have the lowest graduation rate of any other disability group. And then compared to students without disabilities, the graduation rate for neurodivergent students is 58%, but 79% for students without disabilities. And I can say when I was at Utah Valley, my last 5 years there were spent as an academic and ADHD coach in the academic standards department, which is the department that handles probations and warnings and suspensions due to academic challenges, right? Really, it's really GPA focused. But instead of being punitive, that department at UVU is really all about academic recovery and support. And the reason that we all got trained in neurodiversity coaching is because so many of the students who fall through the cracks or who end up on any kind of academic warning, et cetera, are neurodivergent. And so it just was kind of par for the course in terms of helping with that academic recovery. So it goes right along with what we're seeing here in terms of retention and completion rates as well. And then finally, I can't see it, y'all. I have the chat in front of my final little point here. Okay. 2.78 is the prevalence of autism among children aged 8 years in the United States. So there's just some global and national data, but here's some Utah data. And again, like I said, this is going to be ADHD and autism-based data because it's easier to find and gather. So the number of Utah parents who reported that their child has a current ADHD diagnosis is 9.3%. That's the highest rate in the Mountain West, like our little corridor, if you just look at a map, right? 59.5% of these parents reported treatment with ADHD medication. Great. That's great. They're doing something, right? But only 40.9% of these parents reported ADHD behavior treatment. And that's coming right down to what Kylie was talking about, right? Is like, we get the diagnosis, we know what's happening, maybe we throw meds, and I'm not an anti-pill person, but pills don't build skills, right? And so how do we close that gap a little bit? That's kind of what I'm hoping the Utah ADHD Collective can help to do in this state. So there's an understanding of, wow, high diagnosis, medication, a great first line of defense. But then when it comes to behavioral support, behavioral treatment, whether that's therapy, whether that's coaching, whether that's things going on in the classroom, whether that's things going on at home, it's very low. Like I think nationally, the 40.9% was in the 40s somewhere out of 50 states. So yeah, huge gap there between diagnosis and behavioral treatment. And then ASD data, autism data, 0.93 is the prevalence among women ages 18 to 84 who have autism. Utah ties for second place in the country, along with Massachusetts and Minnesota. 3.63 is the prevalence among men ages 18 to 84, and we rank 18th in the United States for that. And then if we, again, look at that group of 8-year-old children in the United States, which was 2.78, which was that rate, the percentage of 8-year-old children with autism in Utah is 2.5. So it's very close to that 2.78 rate. And the 3 counties that were looked into there are Salt Lake, Davis, and Tooele. Just letting people know that's where that came from. So yeah, there's the data. And so, what do we do with that? And how do we support these folks, right? Okay. I don't really see this being political, but I had to share this slide. When we talk about lack of awareness and lack of understanding and the rhetoric that's out there around neurodivergence, right? It's already kind of an uphill battle. It's already a challenge to be accepting and aware and understanding and integrating and inclusive with neurodivergence. But neurodivergence is still often marginalized. It's often not, it's neglected often in like DEI efforts. It's not always thought about as a disability either, but it is. And though it's come a long way, we're still struggling. And so, just these stood out to me when I saw these shared online. These stood out to me. So, regardless of where you are on the political or ideological spectrum, this is the rhetoric coming from leadership in this country.
Marianna?
Yes.
Never mind. I was going to say, we're not seeing anything.
Oh,
but
yeah.
you
Yeah.
said
Because
it.
it needed to make a grand entrance, right?
You're good. Yeah.
Yeah. So 20 years ago, autism in children was 1 in 10,000. Now it's 1 in 34. Wow, something's really wrong. We need Bobby. Thank you. Regardless of the science, regardless of the data, regardless of, you try to bring up the left-handedness comparison, right? Well, we used to punish people for being left-handed, physically punish them for being left-handed, and then we realize that that's not a moral failing. It's the same kind of premise, right? And then we have Tommy saying that we have an attention deficit problem in this country. Attention deficit, when you or I were growing up, our parents didn't use a drug, they used a belt. It's not the kind of behavior treatment we're talking about, Tommy. So again, it's an uphill battle already. It's a challenge for all of us to do this kind of work already. And then you have this kind of rhetoric spreading, and it's extremely discouraging. And so I just wanted to share because it really highlights the weight of what we need to be doing around neurodiversity. Okay, so questions or comments so far? Thoughts? If anyone wants to speak up, you're welcome to. I'm also going to kind of look through the chat.
I know I've already talked on this, but one thing that I wanted to say is that I just think that there's this huge gap between resources and people. Like you, I worked at a residential treatment center that's right down by UVU. And I loved working with the UVU, getting our students accommodations, all kind of accommodations. But for the parents that don't have me as a therapist at a residential program, handing over like holding their hands, or the students that don't have our life coaches that were holding their hands.
Yep.
I don't have an answer to this. I feel like I'm trying to work with people with this, but it's amazing to me how many resources are actually available, or how much help there is actually there, that people that need it are just unaware of. And the connection and that gap to me is the saddest part. It's one thing if there's not resources, but yeah. No,
it's true. And access to resources is another element of this, right? I mean, so many of us are already wearing so many hats and doing more with less. I'm able to offer a few pro bono slots, and I do, but there's only so much of that I can do, right, to be able to make money and eat and feed my children. It's really tough. And again, that awareness and understanding and the destigmatization, so that people do actually seek the kind of support that they might need, right? It's going to take a lot of work for that messaging to come across, and for, again, even just the access to those resources to be available. So, yeah.
Marianna,
yes.
there's a question in the Q&A. Rita's asking, does ARFID fit under this umbrella? ARFID.
Yes, it does. It sure does. So there are, whether you call them eating disorders or however, we label them, absolutely, they fall under, I mean, yeah, I would say they fall under the neurodivergent umbrella, but they're often linked to, a co-occurring condition of some kind. And so, yes, I was just at a session at the ADHD conference last year on ARFID, and I definitely see it like in one of my children, right? So yes, it could fit under this as well. Yeah, let's see. Amy, any reasons or theories explaining why neurodivergent rates are higher in Utah? From everything that I've read and heard and talked to folks about, there really isn't. The state that has that highest ADHD rate, you could say maybe it's the autism rate, I can't remember now, is Virginia, for example. And then us, Minnesota, Massachusetts were number 2. Again, if there's a genetic component and you have a lot of folks in Utah who've been here a while and stay here, you know, for family and things like that. Maybe that's an element, but there really is no answer quite yet as to why we see prevalence in certain regions or areas. Yeah. Yeah, numbers in each state vary. Yeah, okay. Thank you so much for questions, comments. Appreciate all of that. Moving into the executive functions, and then we'll head into what might shift in our approach. Then we'll take our little break and move into tools. So here we go. I'm going to just minimize the chat a little. Hold on. Okay. So executive functions, again, if we have plenty of folks in this room who know what executive functions are, and as Kylie was saying, we can define them, but it's the how and the what do we do with that. So executive functions are the brain functions that activate, organize, integrate, and manage other functions in our brains and our bodies. They are the CEO, the conductor, the ringmaster, the air traffic controller, which kind of sounds scary, right, of the brain. And so some basic neuroscience for the executive function piece. So the reason I bring up executive functioning, sorry, I didn't address that, is we see a lot of executive functions affected by many of these conditions that we're discussing. And so oftentimes, you know, even if we're talking learning disabilities, right? Dyslexia, for example, often with dyslexia, there may be working memory challenges and things as well. So we see a lot of the executive functions involved in these conditions or executive dysfunctions as well. And so that's why I'm bringing them up, because it's a good place to start when it comes to how do we shift our approach. So the basic neuroscience, prefrontal cortex, which is housed in the frontal lobe, it contains our dopamine pathways. And so that's the willpower chemical, right? The motivation chemical. In terms of development, it is the last area, you know, back to front to develop, typically around 25 to 30 years of age is the age range you always kind of, you know, talk about. Well, your brain isn't fully developed until 25. But honestly, it's something that's ongoing. We can always, you know, strengthen neural pathways. We have neuroplasticity. There's always things that can change and grow. But typically, what we do see also is in terms of development, if somebody has a neurodivergent condition, for example, they may have an even further delay with the executive functions. And then finally, like I mentioned, with growth and with change, skills can be taught. This area can be strengthened. There's a researcher out there named Dr. Ned Hallowell. If you do any ADHD stuff, you probably know about Hallowell. And he talks about having a Ferrari engine with bicycle brakes, right? And so some folks have Ferrari engines and Ferrari brakes. That's great. But if it doesn't come natural to you, you know, store-bought is fine, right? So how do you strengthen those brakes? I developed a document for ADHD Awareness Month back in October that I will link for all of you to be able to download. It's just a PDF, but it has a lot of really wonderful resources in terms of holistic treatment as well. So when we talk behavioral treatment, also, you know, life changes, nutrition matters, you know, sleep matters, movement or exercise matters. There's all of these other elements that actually we know help with strengthening this area of the brain. And so we have neuroplasticity. We can help clients do that. Okay, so I'm going to share my executive function model. This is not set in stone. You can Google executive functioning and find all sorts of different models out there or different ways to describe the executive functions. I based mine off of kind of a hybrid of Dr. Thomas Brown, who really developed the initial executive function model back in about early 2000s, 2001. And then Dr. Laura Honos-Webb, who wrote Brain Hacks, which is a book with life-changing strategies to improve executive functioning. So if you're looking for the how, this is a great text for that. Very easy and simple to read. So I kind of took the two of theirs, which were my favorite models, and combined them into what I have here. So this is my model, but You're welcome to adapt and update things. Thomas Brown and Laura Honos-Webb are both clinical psychologists, by the way. So activation and completion is one of the executive functions. This is that task initiation or getting started. Attention and focus, following instructions, staying on task, following through. Cognitive flexibility. This one's not talked about as often. It's being able to change gears. It's being able to transition between tasks, see things from a different perspective. A little bit of that kind of growth mindset versus fixed mindset. Emotional regulation, there it is, managing emotions and keeping the intensity of feelings in check. Organizing and planning, being able to create, not just use system strategies and structures, but also create self-system strategies and structures to prioritize tasks and estimate and manage time, which is a big one. Self-monitoring. This is where a lot of my clients struggle, which is why coaching is really beneficial for them, because even just reflecting back to them what they've said or what they've done or what they've accomplished, right, can be really beneficial. Tracking, regulating, and reflecting on our thinking, behaviors, and performance and progress. And then working memory, remembering temporary information needed for decision-making. So it's not necessarily our short-term memory. It's truly just that like whiteboard or like sticky note section of our brain where you may need that information to do something with it pretty immediately and it's gone. That sticky note is cheap. They're not Post-it brand, they fall off, or it's more of an Etch-a-Sketch rather than a dry erase board, right, in our brains. So here we go with executive functioning, what executive dysfunction might look like. Again, in this neuronormative framework, right, it might look like procrastination, inconsistency, low motivation or lack of motivation, indecision, indecisiveness, poor communication. But that may actually just be executive dysfunction, processing differences, emotional dysregulation, over or under stimulation, and burnout. However, coming from a strengths-based lens, right? And I'm not just saying that ADHD or autism or neurodivergent strengths are only as good as they are to be productive. Or to contribute again to that normativity onion, right? Like we often hear like, oh, wow, you can hyperfocus and get things done for the team when we're on a really tight deadline, #productivity, great job, cool. Otherwise it's a negative, right? Or like if we look at people who are entrepreneurs and oftentimes people say, oh, you have those neurodivergent, strengths that help you be an entrepreneur. But that's only as good as success as an entrepreneur. It's just not measured in a way that is actually very strengths-based. It's still measured against that kind of neuronormative framework. So some strengths that we also see are creativity, innovation, specialization, those special interests, resilience, resilient AF, empathy, adaptability, enthusiasm, honesty, integrity. There's that hyperfocus, advocacy, energy, curiosity, determination, compassion. I'm sure all of you could think of so many more words that we could put there. But yeah, so when we sometimes think of that deficit-based, well, here's the problems with executive dysfunction, we also have to think about the strengths of the neurodivergence as well. The good news is that we can scaffold and support and coach clients to develop those kinds of skills and to even appreciate and strengthen the strengths as well. So I'm going to check just really quickly before I move into that next phase. Will we get the slides? Yeah, Dawn, I updated some of the slides last night, so I'm happy to resend Kelly the current slides as well. Just checking here. Nutrition is huge. Sleep. Yeah. Yep. Resources. Cool. Okay. Oh, so many good ideas here. I love this group. Okay. So moving into the good stuff. What might shift in our approach? Just checking the time. Great. So let's do what might shift in our approach, and then we'll take our 5-minute break. This should be about 10 minutes or so. So this is where I would love to see ideas in the chat as we go, because I'll share a few on the slides. I'll share a few more ways that we can shift our approach. But yeah, please put these in the chat as well. Any ideas that you have, and then I may check the chat after each section and just kind of share some more out. So here we go. How might we shift our approach? So in terms of accommodations, right? Oh, patience, Margarita, yes. So in terms of accommodations, right? Are you allowed to, or can you set up movement-friendly sessions? Can there be fidgeting, pacing, walking, rocking? Can you, not everyone can do this, but can you do a walk and talk, right? There are different settings for that. Walk and talk, Charlene, exactly, yeah. And so movement-friendly sessions can be really, really helpful for a lot of folks. Having sensory awareness. So I'm not just saying like having fidgets in your office, which is super cool. And I can't do that anymore virtually in my work, but it's great to have fidgets in your office and even let them keep the fidget. Have a fidget for yourself. But the sensory awareness piece is also thinking about, might they have sensitivities to the lighting in your office, to fragrances, to overstimulating environments, right? Being very aware of the sensory environment around you as well. Flexible scheduling. It can be very helpful to keep a consistent schedule with clients. And it's tough. Sometimes you may have clients who love that structure, need that structure, and others who might not. And so having a little bit of flexibility within the parameters that you're allowed to have flexibility. If you do have a no-show or a late or cancellation policy of any kind, is there a way to be a little bit more relaxed there, or a little bit more understanding, or, have maybe a minimum of how many times, or a maximum of how many times that, a missed appointment can happen before there's a conversation about it, whatever else, but just having a little bit more flexibility around that. Gentle policies is what I call that. And then reminders as well. If you don't already have things like automated reminders for clients, setting things like that up can be very, very helpful. Now, this is, of course, we have a large group here with varying situations and environments for the work that they do, but those are some options there. So accommodations, helpful memorizing ideas. Touch can be overwhelming, coming back to the sensory awareness, absolutely. Learning styles, visual versus audio versus written as well, versus, again, just graphics and things like that. Trauma-informed design, offer choices. I really, really like that. Options and choices. That's a great point, Kylie. Yeah. Your home office background, if you're virtual, asking if they need breaks. That's fantastic. Yeah. Being able to read those cues, right? And be able to tell maybe they are over or understimulated, and how can I, approach that? Are questions okay? I love that. More general versus specific. Yep. Sand trays or fidget time. Love them as they are. That's so important. And that comes right back down to, I know that we have to talk about this in this more, I don't want to say pathologize necessarily, but in a more labeling kind of way. But again, meeting that person where they are and who they are is the most important. That's really what so many folks need, is just, I've had clients tell me, and I'm sure you have too, right? Where I've never had someone accept me and understand me the way that you do. That's sad when this is a 35-year-old person telling me that, right? That hurts to hear. Shorter appointments, yes. Decreased fees, yep. I'll have younger clients, for example, where we do 25 to 30 minute twice a week because they're 12 after school versus, a 50 to a 60-minute hour session. Yep, we aren't there to fix their neurodiversity. And how often do they come in wanting a fix? And so much of the work we do comes down to the understanding of themselves, the acceptance of themselves. And yeah, absolutely, we can work on the things that you see impacting your functioning, of course. But there are areas that don't need to be fixed, or that don't necessarily need to be managed in the same way. And how can you work with those instead of working against them or trying to fit into a certain kind of mold? Yeah. Lovely, lovely, lovely. Yes. Yeah. And not just in session, Jenny, right? But wanting to talk to parents, maybe do a little bit of parent coaching there too, around what their expectations are from therapy, from coaching, from, their child. Yeah. So again, coming back to that strengths-based piece, neurodivergence, Neurodivergent clients often carry trauma from a history of perceived failures. It impacts their confidence and behavior, as I mentioned before. They may experience heightened self-criticism. And again, if you have emotional regulation challenges, self-monitoring challenges, you feel that feeling like you don't have feelings, you are feelings. And so it can truly feel so acute and intense and strong. And so, yeah, so, emphasizing strengths, reflecting back that progress and past successes. I start every single session off with, not just how was your week, but what were bright spots, what were wins, what were successes, because so many folks come to sessions and immediately want to launch into what they failed at doing, what they didn't follow through on from the previous session, or whatever else, instead of coming forward with that strengths-based mentality, right? Approaching setbacks with compassion and patience, which I'm sure you all do, but focusing on effort rather than just outcomes, because we know, that effort, motivation, reward cycle, right? It doesn't say outcome, motivation, reward. It's effort, motivation, reward. And sometimes that's what folks need, is just reinforcing that they've put in the effort, that, that's more than they might have done the previous week. And that's a huge deal. I think sometimes also normalizing, it may feel so silly as an adult, for example, to sit there and have to talk about, I finally did my laundry after 4 weeks. Like, I should be able to just do this. This is ridiculous, right? But that's okay. We're normalizing that laundry sucks to do, and it's a challenge for you, and you did it. Even that kind of approach, right? And encouraging that self-determination, autonomy, competence, relatedness, and the self-advocacy, because that's extremely empowering, right? And yeah, there's also the rejection sensitivity that many neurodivergent folks experience. And so keeping your space a safe space during sensitive moments, that might be related to rejection, keeping that trust and safety going, is extremely important, because they may be a little bit more sensitive to perceived rejection as well. So just looking through here, teaching parents to teach their kids, yes, instead of expecting them to make associations like you would raising a neurotypical child, absolutely, yes. So much of the work that I do, Erin, is I will work with parents on parent and like family dynamic coaching, and wait until they're preteen is a little older to refer them out to another coach, because I wouldn't work with parents and with their child, and so I focus on that parent coaching, to help them coach their children. With my kid clients, we start with roses and thorns. That's lovely. Rose, one thing they liked about their week. Thorn, one thing they didn't like. This normalizes talking about things going wrong as well. Absolutely. That's lovely. Yeah. Or bringing up, so here's the wins, what were some of the challenges this week, or one thing you didn't like, and, what happened, and what do we do differently, and how do we, try something else or whatever. Yeah. Reminding neurodivergent adults that everyone's behaviors will be different, so expecting their kids to be the exact same as them is unrealistic. Absolutely. You've met one neurodivergent person, right? And we do see that oftentimes, kind of coming back to what I keep bringing up Kylie, but what Kylie was talking about with, there's not a lot out there in terms of actual ideas around this, or resources around this. And so people do fall into those traps of, if you have ADHD, here are 5 things that you can do to live a better life. And then they're like, I've tried those 5 things and I didn't live a better life, and I failed at them, and oh my God, I suck. And it immediately turns into, this blanket strategizing that really doesn't do much good. So, yes, it's good to have these spaces to help people find their other zebras, and to, find those commonalities, but at the same time, having more individualized approaches around management is much, much better and much more sustainable. Finally, process, right? So in our process, like in actual sessions, for example, or in the partnership, in the relationship over time, I like to call it triage when I first start working with folks, because they are very much in that deficit space. They're very much looking at the areas that are putting them on a performance improvement plan at work, or that are causing them to fail their entire semester, or whatever else it might be. And so we do a little bit of triage, really focusing on strategies around that, and a lot of trial and error before we really get into the self-actualization piece and the longer term goals. Neurodivergent clients may need additional clarification. Clarity and direction are so important for a lot of neurodivergent folks. Asking for permission to redirect when they've gone off on tangents, or, we go in a different direction. Sometimes in coaching, it's a matter of, can I just ask a question really quickly, or may I interrupt? You came into the session wanting to talk about this, and it's 20 minutes later, and I'm hearing us going in this direction. I'm hearing you mention this often. Would you like to focus on that instead for the rest of our session? Kind of, reassessing what the actual agenda is for the session as well. But really oftentimes gently redirecting is important to do. Otherwise it can just go off the rails, right? Depending on the client, of course, using shorter, more directive questions, slowing your pace to allow for processing, really holding that space for I don't know question, or I don't know responses, right? So you ask the question, I don't know, instead of jumping into wanting to ask something else, right? Really giving it that pause, because oftentimes I don't know is filler. And they just need to process, and they'll come out with something, right? Concrete questions are important. Summer V, yes. Yes, an autistic client I had asked for more specific questions instead of broad and vague. Yes. So again, there's that cognitive flexibility piece too, like being able to generate multiple possibilities. If you ask someone like, well, what are the options? They literally might not know. And this could also just be a developmental thing, just based on age too, right? So if you're working with younger clients, it may be helpful to help them generate those possibilities, or ask permission to offer some potential options or strategies, and let them, be in choice around if they'd like to, pursue one of those options. Let's talk about it, right? So that keeping them in choice, but more concrete options or questions can be very important, especially for clients with autism. Being cautious, depending on the client, with metaphors or analogies, right? They might not resonate with everyone. And so that's important as well. Recognizing masking behaviors. And masking is a term that we haven't talked about a lot, but again, it's masking your kind of natural tendencies or behaviors or urges to fit into this neuronormative onion, right? And so you might see that they're trying to suppress some kind of stimming, like maybe they really want to rock back and forth as they're talking, but gosh, they know they're not supposed to do that in public, so they won't. Again, if you're creating that space of trust and safety, right? Allowing them to express those stims is really important, right? Or they might be answering in a way that they think you want to hear versus really answering truthfully, right? So being aware of that. Another one too is reassuring clients they don't need an immediate answer. That is not the expectation in this office, right? You don't have to have an answer when I ask you this question. You can ask to mull it over. You can ask to think about it until the next session, giving them that permission ahead of time, setting, again, that clarity around expectations in the partnership is extremely important for a lot of folks. Paying attention to nonverbal cues. Was that question too complex? Do I need to rephrase? Co-brainstorming to help generate ideas, incorporating tools and visuals to clarify options or steps, which I'll be sharing some of those tools in the second half here. And then, as the final bullet point says, assisting them in breaking things down into manageable chunks. A lot of that co-creation of what might those next steps look like, any kind of accountability in place. So, I mean, there's so many more ideas, right? And as we're seeing in the chat, we're seeing that as well. Yeah. Yep, that helped me extend that consideration to other clients. Absolutely. So again, as you start making these shifts in your approach, you'll start noticing, well, yes, they're a benefit to my neurodivergent clients, but they might be a benefit to all of my clients. So you will start potentially seeing that, you know. So yes, bio break, it is time. Let's meet back up in 5 minutes at 15 after, and then we'll dive into the tools.
Perfect. We'll see you guys back at 11:15. You ready to go?
Ready to go. I wasn't, but I am now.
There is another comment in the Q&A, just so you know.
Sure.
Wanting to address that, just to let you know, whenever you want.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, really, we've got about half an hour to 40 minutes of the tools and resources, and then we'll go to Q&A for a good 10 to 15. So we can just save it for then. Yeah. All right. So welcome back, everyone. Thanks for coming back. Hope you had a nice bio break. We are going to move into some tips and tools that like I said, I either have developed or I've borrowed or adapted. And you're welcome to always email me or message me if you'd like copies of these tools, things like that. So let's go from there. The Wheel of Life, or the Life Wheel. I'm sure many of you have used this tool. It's so common in the work that we all kind of do. This is just one I threw together for the presentation. Oftentimes you see, 8 slices of pie. And for those who haven't used it, you may use this as a tool to help clients figure out areas of their life that they might want to work on. You can use it as a measurement tool to see, how they've made progress, to help them see that. So essentially what I did was took this wheel of life and adapted it to an executive function wheel. Again, I've had some people say, well, this feels pretty deficit-based. It does. I'll show you the next page, which it's a two-pager, which definitely includes those strengths that we talked about. But again, when I have clients coming to me seeking out ADHD coaching or executive function coaching, it's not because they're just doing it for, the heck of it. They're doing it because there's something affecting functioning in their professional life, personal life, whatever it is. And so this is a helpful tool, again, to help them understand, where these things might be coming from, where they do have strengths. Sometimes they get caught up in the strengths. So you might have clients who are really good at organizing and planning, for example. And so they love that. They love that space. They will make the perfect spreadsheet. They will make the perfect to-do list, and they will have rewritten it 4 times. And by the time they're done doing that, because they enjoy spending time in that pie slice, then they're exhausted. They've depleted their executive functioning battery, and they don't want to actually activate, initiate, or be able to see the tasks through. So, we see that too, where though there are strengths, how do we also manage how much time we spend there? And so, of course, these are separated out, right? And we're talking about the executive functions as silos, but of course, we know that they're so interconnected and there's these dynamics between them all. So essentially, I have folks look at this pie chart, fill it in, but we're using this second page. Yes, it's a little text heavy, but if you walk a client through it, it can be helpful. And so I have this column of challenges, and then each row is, one of those executive functions. But then I also have the strengths. Now, here's the thing. I really should maybe switch it so that it's challenges and strengths. The strengths are potentially there, but sometimes if it weren't for the person having executive function challenges, the strengths wouldn't necessarily be there. And so it's not necessarily this linear thing with well, if you have these challenges, then you don't have these strengths, or if you have these challenges, you have these strengths. What I'm trying to say with that, I'll share an example. If someone is, again, it's that hyper focus. I have clients, and there's plenty of articles out there, right? Or videos where people ask, how can I trigger my hyper focus? How can I turn it on and off? If you could do that, then you wouldn't have executive function challenges, because that's the point, is that you can't. And so the hyperfocus is a strength and it's a part of you, but it's not necessarily going to be there in the same way if you didn't also have some of those challenges. So that's kind of how I've listed the strengths as well. So we won't go through each of these in detail. You're welcome to take a look. But essentially, what I've had clients do is we've either gone through this together, or if they want to do it as homework because they're really eager to get started on something, they can go through it themselves, and I have them either circle or highlight or mark in some way which of these bullet points really stands out to them. They're also welcome to add bullet points if they would like to. And then we review together, what made you circle this? How does that show up for you? What makes it a problem, if anything? But then we also talk through the strengths and how those show up. And so then we'll, toggle between each row and then go back to the previous slide and talk about how would you rank yourself or how would you rate yourself based on what you just reviewed, right? And so sometimes before we've met, they'll do it and they'll rate themselves a certain level. And then when we talk through it and as they start processing out loud, they go, you know what? I might actually be a 4 and not a 3. Or they might be like, you know what? This is a 2 and not a 3, right? So they might have some checks there and balances, I guess, with that. So yeah, so you're welcome to, use this tool. If you want to email me and get a copy, it's just a PDF. You're welcome to adapt the idea and do it in a different way. But this is such a great starting point, again, to create the visual, to create that self-understanding, to be able to, make choices around where is this just a part of me and it's dope versus where do I really need to kind of target some of this strategizing or planning around, mechanisms or tactics that will work to help manage things, not fix it, but to help manage things. So yes, this is one tool. And something to think about as we're going into helping our clients come up with those kinds of strategies is the executive function battery. I don't want to say I'm 100% sure, but I'm like 98% sure that most folks in this room have heard of spoon theory. And so, how folks with chronic illnesses, for example, or disabilities, manage their energy. And we're talking for daily tasks. This is what I was talking about before. Like someone thinks, well, I should be able to just do the laundry. Well, not if your executive function battery isn't, or your spoons, your executive function spoons aren't full enough. And so, you start the day with a limited number of spoons. You have to think about how you're going to use your spoons. You have to constantly be worrying about that. And so if we take that same kind of theory, but apply it to executive functioning, I like to think of it as a battery. I mean, you could do spoon theory for it too. So a neurotypical executive function battery may be larger in the first place. They may start the day more fully charged or closer to being fully charged. It might have a longer battery life and it's easier to recharge. Whereas a neurodivergent executive function battery may be smaller in the first place, may start the day at a lower charge. It might rarely be charged 100%, and it might be more difficult to recharge. So keeping this kind of metaphor in mind, or, even this kind of visual aid in mind, knowing where those executive strengths and challenges manifest, how they show up, can help clients recognize which tasks or activities take more battery power than others. What do they need to do to recharge, right? So much of the conversation may be less about just, I'm going to try this strategy to help with my working memory. And it might be more about, how are you recharging your executive function battery in general throughout the day? There's something called the DOPA menu, which is a dopamine menu. And there's little snackable things like jumping jacks for a few minutes or listening to a song that energizes you, like Don't Stop Me Now by Queen, which is one of my favorite songs to listen to when I need to recharge a little. Coming up with that DOPA menu and what that might look like for them. Also being able to kind of estimate, again, when we talk about struggling with estimating how much time things might take, they may underestimate how much time or how much executive functioning something takes. And so when they plan out their week, for example, they may overload on tasks that use up a lot of their battery in one day. And then they're depleted, exhausted, and feel really, really guilty that they can't get to everything else. And so just helping them recognize, how much did this deplete your battery? And how else could you do that thing, or how else could you integrate it into your life or into your routine, or whatever else. And so, yeah, the executive function battery, or you could spoon theory executive functioning as well. Let's see here. This, oh, no, questions or comments, actually. I would like to just ask comments, questions. I clicked out of the chat again, so I'll have to open that up here. Yeah, being an artist requires hyper focus. Yeah, I'm happy to share with Kelly the updated slides PDF. I will be sharing a handout with you that has a lot of awesome resources, literature, audio, video stuff, and then a little glossary, a neurodiversity glossary. But I'm also happy to include in an email to Kelly the document with this executive function battery, the executive function wheel. I'm happy to share that as well.
So I sent the slides that you had sent to me.
Mm-hmm.
I sent them out. Are they the same, or you're saying that?
There's a few adjustments.
Okay.
So
I can resend those then. Absolutely.
yeah. Okay. Yeah. And then Thora said about the battery, I add in because life isn't sensory torture. Right? They're not, I mean, when we talk about something like ADHD, for example, literally the word deficit is in the full name, right? But it's really an abundance of attention. And so that onslaught of information that we are all constantly getting in modern day, right, feels like 10 times as hard for people with ADHD, for example, and so, yeah, your battery is being drained constantly and quickly in a way that maybe a neurotypical battery isn't. That's a great point. Thank you. Oh, interesting. There are a lot of autistic people online saying that labeling as highly sensitive person is an ableist way to label as autistic. Not true, right? Can you be HSP and autistic, HSP and ADHD? I would say that they can be co-occurring. It's just that so much of the HSP like symptoms or manifestations, right, overlap with those conditions, that I don't know that somebody would necessarily have to label themselves with both. It's just kind of like, but there are differences. One of the books that I am listing on that resources is Divergent Mind. It will be on the resource page, I promise, from Janera Narenberg. And it is a fantastic book. It is more specifically for women, but it is all about the highly sensitive people piece, the ADHD, the autism, the synesthesia, sensory processing, dispelling misconceptions and proposing, societal shifts and things like that. It's really just the divergence, right, that's covered in this book. But she actually breaks down the differences between something like HSP and other divergences. So this one would be a great one for anyone interested in HSP stuff too. Let's see. A lot of autistic people. Okay, HSP and ADHD. Parents with children who are therapy or coaching averse. Ooh, Rita, let's bring that one to the Q&A at the end, because that's a great question, and I'd love to hear from other folks too. Rachel, full neuropsychological evaluation. I do think, especially if someone feels that they may have multiple, co-occurring conditions, that would probably be good. We know, for example, a lot of women were misdiagnosed as bipolar when really it was ADHD. And so I think there's some of that where you really should go neuropsychological full eval. But I also know there are providers who are more willing to diagnose some of these things without the full eval, right? The full 8-hour, eval. And so, yeah, so that's a little iffy. But there are providers who could diagnose. Again, you don't want to just get a diagnosis so you can get medication, because, for example, like with ADHD, but there are providers out there who can diagnose certain conditions. But again, if it's a lot of overlap and we're seeing things like the anxiety and the depression coming in there, like you'd probably want a full eval. Yeah. Subject to test or error. Yeah, there's some good points there. The book, Divergent Mind, and it will be on the handouts. Yeah, it's really good. I really love it. Yeah, I don't have that one tabbed up as much as I do this one, which is also on the handout. You can see all my tabs. Your brain's not broken is another great one. So yes, we'll get to that when we get to the handouts. Okay, fantastic. Thank you for questions and comments. So moving into the final tools. You're like, a red box, cool. So this is something called the energy or solve it grid. It is linked in the handout. The blog that this comes from, what I'll be sharing with you comes from, is linked in the handout, but the concept itself comes from Your Brain's Not Broken, which I just held up with all my tabs. They call it the Solve It Grid. The blog writer calls it, who's also, I mean, she's a clinician. The blog writer calls it an energy grid, I believe, or maybe she calls it the Solve It Grid, but I like to call it the energy grid because all of this comes back to what we were talking about: spoon theory, executive function battery, being aware of how those executive functions impact us. So here you go. I'll walk you through the quadrants. So we have upper part is stimulating, right side is fun, bottom is not stimulating, left side is not fun. And so when we look at just our daily functioning, right, just every single day as humans, there are always fires that we're having to put out. Things pop up regardless, even something small like, I've spilled this glass of milk. Now I have to go, refill my milk and clean it up and da 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 da. Fires will always crop up. But we'll get to the problem with fires in just a moment. And then we have the fueling fun. So it's stimulating and fun. This is where that dopamine menu comes into play. This is where we talk about how do you recharge your battery. That quadrant can be filled with small things or big things that refuel you. They might take a little bit more energy to do, and that's where that initiation can be a challenge, but they refill your cup, right? The next one is passive fun or passive energizing, right? And so it's fun, but it's not stimulating. And for a lot of folks, this is screen time. It's the doom scrolling. It's the, I just want to shut off my brain for the night. I'm done. And then I'm going to sit here, and I could sit here for 8 hours watching Instagram reels, and it won't recharge me as much as a 30-minute walk might. And again, fueling looks different for different people, right? Or even something like video games, especially if you're working with younger clients, right? You may want to assume that video games are passive fun, but it depends on the client. It depends on what game they're playing. And I've had clients who've literally broken out certain types of games as passive and certain types of games as fueling. And once they made that distinction and integrated that into their lives, it shifted things for them. And then finally, the shoulds. The shoulds are not fun, nor are they stimulating. They are things like needing to pay the bills, do your taxes, do the laundry. It's the chores. It's it's the things that need to be done before they become fires. And that's the problem for a lot of neurodivergent folks, is that because they are not fun and not stimulating, these hang out here until they become orange or red. So you end up spending so much of your time putting out fires, which is not fun. It's stimulating, but it's exhausting, right? You deplete that energy. And then from there, you end up sliding into the passive because you just want to shut your brain off. And so you end up skipping these two quadrants completely and fall into this nasty pattern of fires to passive, fires to passive. So I feel like this is the case for just humans in general, a lot of people, right? Especially like just with the way that our culture works, hustle, hustle, hustle. But for neurodivergent folks, it takes a lot more effort to do the fueling and the shoulds. So this is the red-blue slide. Like I was saying, you spend so much time putting out fires that you slide into that your depleted executive function battery, you slide into the passive energy, and you just live life like that. And that is not conducive to, long-term goals, to feeling like you're making any kind of progress. So I'm going to talk about the 5 motivators that we tend to see. This is geared more towards ADHD, but I mean, we see it in autism, we see it in a lot of neurodivergent spaces. There's an interest-based nervous system, and that comes from Dr. William Dotson, which I've put here. So there's kind of 5 key motivators for ADHDers, for example, or neurodivergent folks. We have interest, novelty, challenge, but the right amount of challenge. It can't be so challenging that it's overwhelming and then you just avoid it, right? Urgency and passion. So when we talk about things like special interests, right, that really falls under passion even more than interest, because those are long-term special interests that somebody might have. Interest is going to be more of that hyperfixation, or hey, I really want to learn how to make soap, and now I have, and now I'm going to start a business and a side hustle selling soap, which I did for 3 years and finally closed down recently. That's that interest piece. If you're interested in it, it's an interesting topic, you're into it for 3 months, cool. I'll be motivated to do stuff around that. The novelty is just something different, something new, right? So there's that element of people needing routine oftentimes and wanting it and desiring it, but then it's at odds with some of these motivators. So when you're thinking about that dopamine menu, when you're thinking about that refueling in the green sector or green quadrant, when you're thinking about strategies and tools, for executive functioning, you want to keep these things in mind. There has to be that buy-in, because intrinsic motivation can be a lot harder for neurodivergent individuals, especially without these kind of five motivators. So it's always a good tool to kind of use as a way to ask questions, right, around what their interests are or what would be challenging or novel to them or whatever. Now, urgency, we know, is a common tool for a lot of people. The deadline, the quick turnaround, that's when motivation kicks into gear. That's fine. It can be used as a strategy. And oftentimes, especially when you're triaging, it has to, but that is not sustainable. And helping clients understand that that's what's going to lead to that burnout, or overstimulation or whatever else, is constantly being in that urgency state. So yes, the 5 motivators. So coming back to that here, again, thinking about urgency is absolutely going to be here. Like that's where the urgency is stimulating enough to kick you in to gear, to do the fire, to put out the fires. But if we're thinking about doing it as a green-yellow slide with inevitable fires and maybe a little bit of passive time, that can be a lot more manageable for people. And it doesn't mean that they have to get everything in the should section completed or done right away, but even chipping away at things can be helpful. And also just accepting the fact that I will never get my taxes done before April 15th. That's just what it is. That's how it is. I can put everything in place to do it right. It's never going to happen. Okay, well, then that's a fire I can plan for. And that's okay. But even then, being able to kind of plot that out a little bit more. So finally, with that, we want to be able to figure out with clients what's that fueling or active fun, and that's going to look different for everybody. I had an 11-year-old client who said pooping was one of his fueling active fun activities, and I was like, okay, all right, bud. But no, he felt better, he felt energized, and then he would feel like he could do stuff afterwards, right? I have another client who literally he has straight up has a oh my gosh, what is it called when you do the cold water, not cold water therapy, but when you do like the cold water plunges, right? He has a tank for that on his balcony. And that is one of his activators that he listed, the fueling activators. But for him, it's a matter of that's so hard that like anything else that I need to do, including just writing up a discussion post for class, is going to be so much easier to do afterwards. I mean, it's wild. Or even the idea of doing that activator and not wanting to ends up having people just do the thing they were supposed to do anyway, right? So it depends on your client, how they kind of see the fueling active fun. But if you can work on figuring out what those are for people, what are needs versus rewards, for example, as well. Don't make something a reward if it's really a need and it's really a fueling active fun activity that needs to happen for you. Having those conversations. So anywho, fueling active fun, sliding into tasks we need or should do. And again, that can be chunked down day by day or week by week, one priority item that week that should be done that's great too. That's a win, because you will inevitably have little fires pop up, or planned fires that you need the urgency for. And then if you feel like you've been productive or you've accomplished something that day, even if it's something small, like truly putting the dishes away, or whatever it is, then it's like, yeah, I can do a little bit of the shut off my mind, have some of that passive fun. That's okay. So it's just a matter of kind of reorganizing. So I'll share one example before we get into Q&A. My husband is a faculty member. He's a writing professor. And when we talked about this model, he shared that for him, teaching, right, is he gets that teaching high, right? Anyone who's taught or been a performer, you get the performance high, right? Show high. He gets that teaching high, and that fulfillment, and he's kind of on and in the zone, and he has refueled. He's in that green quadrant. And he knows that if he doesn't try to get other work done or do grading right off of that teaching high, it's going to be a lot harder. It's going to become an orange or a red until he absolutely has to grade. And that's not fun for anybody. Or it becomes something he ends up doing during his entire Saturday, but he has to take a bunch of breaks in between to refuel and get back to it. And that's not fun either. Like, you don't want to do that your whole Saturday. So for him, it was a matter of, if I do the teaching and slide into the grading, there's going to be inevitable fires that crop up, but then I can kind of just enjoy myself and call it good, right? Or do some more greens, like play some music or whatever. So anywho, that's one example, but there's so many countless others. So yeah, I think that's it in terms of the energy grid, the executive function battery, the executive function wheel, a lot of things here to play with. I'm trying to look through. Yeah, personally don't prefer using the word should, JC. I appreciate that. We should ourselves a lot, right? And our clients should ourselves. I like using shoulds just because for a lot of my neurodivergent clients, a task list or a to-do list or something like that can feel overwhelming. And so they just don't like to call it that. And so we'll play around with calling things different things, right? So if it's not shoulds, it might be, I mean, I have my list here. Now, I had a different name for my list. It was like wish list or something like that, right? Like you can play around with that as well. Yeah, all these CE sessions are fueling for me. Absolutely, Rita. So many of us, are learners. And it's very refueling to do something like this for sure. Okay, so not a lot of other questions and comments here. So in the chat, I'm going to, I believe, stop sharing. No, closing discussion. I would love to hear from folks. Thoughts, questions. You're welcome to put in the chat based on where you were before and based on where you are after 2 hours with me. Where would you say you are in neurodiversity now? How much more well-versed? Did you go up by 0.25 or 0.5 maybe? You're welcome to share that. Yeah, thoughts, comments. We can do some of the Q&A now. I'll just escape. I'll just stop sharing. There we go. You can see faces better. Up to a 6. Nice.
Well, people are putting those in. I took note of some questions from back, that were missed.
Yeah, thank you.
So let me go back. I put the time down. So I got it. But there were just a few that
Okay.
were over or that we kind of missed. Sorry, I should have been prepared before I got on.
You're fine.
Let's see. Okay. So I'm wondering if you can speak to pathological demand avoidance and divergence. It seems more addressed in the UK, but makes more sense to me versus ODD diagnosis.
Yeah. I appreciate someone bringing that up. And the reason I didn't touch it before was because I felt like it could, kind of run away. And so I wanted to make sure to save that for later. Yeah, I've heard parents say like, oh, I think he might have a little ODD. And as we all know, when someone is 5, unless it's like maybe a really severe presentation, right? Like that diagnosis doesn't usually come around that age. And so, yes, there does tend to be behavior around demand avoidance with ADHD, for example, and you know, with some of the other conditions. There's something about like, don't tell me what to do. You know, I have a friend who actually has ADHD and makes that joke, like, don't tell me what to do. If I ever like request something or say, maybe you should try this, don't tell me what to do. And so that's where I think, you know, that's where I think something like coaching or therapy, right? Just in terms of making sure that the buy-in is coming from the client, making sure that it's a co-creation of these things, making sure that they're a part of that. Because again, especially young people, they're not often used to a dynamic where they are a partner in that kind of situation or relationship. And so, you know, you don't want it to come off as if you're assigning something or demanding something. And so, yeah, I've worked with parents, you know, coaching around the demand avoidance. Yeah, I would say we do see ODD with things like ADHD or autism, but I would agree with the UK that it's more demand avoidance, and some of that can come from, again, the cognitive flexibility, right? It can come off as being stubborn or strong-willed or demand avoidant, but it's really that executive function of cognitive flexibility. So there are ways to build the skills within that. Yeah. Sorry, that was kind of all over the place, but yeah.
Oh, I love that you said that, because we see that a lot with the kids
Yeah.
that come into the CJC, where parents are the ones that are saying, oh, they're ODD. It's like, ooh, let's not just throw that around.
We don't just throw that word, right? Like that acronym around. Right.
It's a hard label.
It is a hard label. Exactly. Yeah. So I preferred, yeah, the demand avoidance piece too.
We had another one that Erin was wondering. She said, I think as a social worker, you find out about so many resources at once that it's hard to remember or keep track of what is available. I agree. We seek so many different areas of need that sometimes when a client asks for resources, I draw a blank. How have you found it's the best way to keep track of those resources, or what do you guide clients to that isn't overwhelming for them to look at?
Yeah. I think someone answered up above. I saw that come through, and I'm curious if I can find it. There it is. Becky responded. I recommend starting an electronic folder or central place to add resources as you get them, so you can go back to them when the need pops up again. That's what I do too, Becky. I have a folder on my desktop of a lot of these worksheets or tools that I've gathered or created. So it's really easy as someone's bringing something up and asking for some kind of resource to you know, ask if they would like to see this or this, and then bookmarks for me, at least on my browser. I have them in folders. I need to do a lot of organizing right now because it's a hot mess, but I have them in folders. I have things for referrals to psychiatrists or other therapists. I have you know, a folder specific to procrastination, a folder specific to whatever else it might be, executive functioning, you know, things like that. So that's typically the best way, where they're not necessarily exposed to a ton of resources, and I can kind of curate that a little bit more based on their individual needs. So that's just what I do. But if other people have ideas, they are welcome to put them in the chat too.
I love that, because I know I have places I put resources and then I can't remember where I put them because of my own issues.
Exactly, right? Yeah, so we have to create those systems and structures for ourselves as professionals. And so, yeah.
Okay, I'll let you go. Those were just a few that were
great
back. So
sure. Yeah. So I know Rita had asked, wow. Oh gosh. Okay. Rita had asked, what advice do you have for parents with children who are therapy, coaching, parental suggestions averse? That's a tough one. Speaking of, you know, demand avoidance. Yeah. For me, I know when I do my screening, and again, it might look different for everybody, especially if you're just assigned a caseload and you don't really have a choice. But when I do my screening, I will initially do the screening with the parents, and then I typically like to do it with the kiddo. So I do have a few kind of free consultation, you know, moments when it's working with younger people. I'll work with kiddo, and then often I'll kind of do a wrap-up consultation with everyone together so that we're all on the same page, so that there's that transparency and we're really sharing with the child what mom and dad are hoping for, but also the child is able to share what they're hoping for. And sometimes you can tell they're just not ready, right? They're just not ready to be in that kind of partnership or relationship. You know, they'll show up to therapy and just not talk for 50 minutes, right? Or they show up to coaching and they aren't really partnering. They're not really engaged. They're not interested in co-creating things. It's just not there. And so in those instances, for me, at least, I will recommend working with the parents instead. And again, like I said earlier, I might work with them for a while. And if what they're doing with the kiddo is working for their family, and the kiddo becomes a lot more receptive to, you know, to coaching or therapy, then, you know, maybe making that referral to a therapist for the kiddo or to another coach for the kiddo. So that's my own approach is if it feels like they're not coachable or they're not in a place for that, I will work with the parents if the parents are willing, so that we can co-create plans for them around parental suggestions or structures and systems in the home or whatever else. So that's just my advice on that. I love hearing people are reflecting, understanding some of why I function and struggle the way I do. Neurodivergent parent with neurodivergent kids is a big storm. Oh yeah. And you know, already there's parent guilt, just in general, right? As parents. But with the neurodivergent parenting neurodivergent kids, I feel like the parent guilt just goes through the roof. It's hard. It's hard to have your own executive function battery already depleted throughout the day, especially if you're working as well and have other things going on, and then use the rest of that executive function battery to help someone else understand their own executive functioning and scaffold for them and help them build out those systems and structures and understanding and regulation and all of that. It's challenging. It's a lot, which is why I also love the parent coaching too, you know. Let's see, do you work with couples when there's one partner with ADHD and one neurotypical? Yes, I have one right now that I'm working with. I'm doing parent coaching with them so that they can help their 12-year-old, but also their two younger ones. They said that their youngest is feral. And they were like, no ADHD diagnosis yet, but I was like, well, you described her as feral. So it was pretty funny. But yeah, mom has ADHD, dad does not. And we, you know, we were looking at the executive function wheel and she turned to him and she was like, you could be a 5 on all of these. You're you're neurotypical AF. And it was so funny. Executive functioning superstar, right? And so it is extremely helpful. I can say in my own situation, my husband was diagnosed first when I started doing work in this space because I recognized all of these things, right? And went, hey, babe, that helped. So we had one kiddo diagnosed, then my husband, then me, and then our youngest. Just understanding and knowing where we were coming from, what was causing, it's not an excuse, right? But the reasoning and the explanation. I mean, we now kind of coach one another or support one another in ways that we wouldn't have 5 years ago. I had an incident happen while we were traveling where these teenagers got in my face just randomly on the street. I could not let it go the rest of the night. It ruined the rest of my night. It ruined dinner. I couldn't let it go. And my 13-year-old was like, Mom, you're just dealing with a little bit of rejection sensitivity right now. And it's going to feel better tomorrow. And no matter what we say, it might not help, but I just need you to know that that's what's going on, you know? And I was just like, this is amazing. You are so wise. So having the conversations, having again, the framework, the language for partners to be able to understand where things are coming from. So helpful. So I do work with couples, or I'll work with a client who has ADHD with a neurotypical partner. And, you know, talk about how do I self-advocate? How do I explain? What do I share with them? To make this work a little bit more. There are a few books, Rachel, regarding like family dynamics and things like that are on my handout that I'll put in the chat in just a moment. There are, this is more ADHD specific, but there are events called ADHD Paloozas. So if you just Google ADHD Palooza, you'll find it. Linda Rogley is the host. She's lovely. I've met her a few times. She's wonderful. And she does one for women, a women's ADHD Palooza, and then she does one for couples. And then she used to do a parenting one, but that was taken over by another wonderful group called Impact Parents. And those two women, the founders, are wonderful as well. And they've kind of taken on this parenting palooza. So there are these amazing conferences that are really affordable, and even free unless you buy like the Encore package or whatever. So the paloozas, ADHD paloozas, are wonderful short conferences. And then Impact Parents is another really wonderful organization as well. So yes, okay, information to help others, appreciate information, knowledge shared, resources available for neurodivergent clients, what programs are available for them. Ooh, Tanya, okay, what are resources available for neurodivergent clients and what programs are available for them? I just shared the two that are wonderful. And then from there, like just checking out those paloozas or these conferences or these other organizations, you can kind of piggyback off of that into, you know, some of those speakers organizations. Like there is a lot up there. The resource page I'm sharing with you is going to have books and audiobooks that are absolutely not like textbooks. Like, you know, I have Motivational Interviewing 3rd edition in front of me, right? Like, you don't want to necessarily share that with clients, but something like Brain Hacks, Divergent Mind, Your Brain's Not Broken, those kinds of books are very digestible for most folks, and most of them have audiobooks. So I have that. I also have podcasts that I've shared, or like people to follow as well, people in this space who are kind of leading it out, videos, you know, YouTube channels, things like that. So that's all there. Those are good starts. And so if you want more, please feel free to email me or talk amongst yourselves too, in terms of what resources folks have. Is there a significant statistical correlation that indicates the percentage of neurodivergent people in LGBTQ population? Huge, but any number will be off because no one has a count for neurodivergence itself. Exactly. That's why we have to say like reasonable estimate of the population, you know, that's neurodivergent in some way. Yeah, we do see some of that overlap. And, you know, and then we see overlap with other intersections. You know, there are a number of trans folks, for example, who have autism and ADHD. And so then there's this, I've been to many sessions where we have this discussion around that, like, you know, what's the correlation? Is it a neurodevelopmental thing? Is it more of, hey, I'm already kind of shunning, or not shunning, but not necessarily fitting into the neuronormative mold. So I'm more likely to lean into my transness, you know, versus someone who might be masking that or wanting to hide that or not integrate, you know, into, you know, society or whatever. It's fascinating. There's so many conversations around all of the intersections. Let's see. The community prefers pervasive drive for autonomy instead of avoidance. Demand avoidance. So yes, thank you for sharing that. Okay, yeah, ideas for handling the responses. I don't know. It can be so hard to move forward. What guesses do you have? If you did know, what might it be? That one's a little harder. What else did Mike say? That's fine. Sometimes it's hard to know what's going on. Maybe we could explore it together. Again, you might not know now. You know, I'm wondering if you need more time. And sometimes it's just rephrasing the original question in a way that doesn't bring up the I don't know, or the kind of blank stare, and patience and silence, right? For sure. Again, giving it a few beats after I don't know before reading the cues. Do they really just need more time? Are they just processing, or do I need to rephrase or, you know, say something else? Yeah, there's a lot of great resources around, or a lot of options around I don't know. Let's see. JC Graham, do you have a resource list for referrals for assessments outside of a university setting? I do have some, but they're primarily for ADHD. And then the ADHD collective will also have, I mean, a full directory is what I'm hoping for, so that it's easy for folks like us to find these things, find these referrals. Okay, we are out of time. I can't answer the rest of these questions, but I can save the chat and try to get back to people, or Kelly can. Let me place the links and the handout in the chat. So right now I'm placing the handout that I've been referring to. Oh, it says there's an error message on the form and it will not submit.
Okay, that's not you. You guys, we had over 300 people on this, and everybody's trying to send their evaluation in at the same time.
It's overloaded.
You're breaking it.
It's overstimulated, guys.
You know,
Yeah.
just save it, give it, or you try tomorrow or tonight and it should go through. If you still have a problem, then get a hold of Gabby and we'll
Yeah.
work on that. But I think that's really what's happening.
Great. Okay, that's good to know. And yeah, save the link, make sure you can still submit it after.
Okay.
So the handout is in there. You should be able to download it, but I will also send it off to Kelly as a follow-up. And then let me just place a couple of more links in here. So as a part of the Utah ADHD Collective, if you would like to be involved, if you would like your name to be in that directory, I'm finally rolling out all of the membership things over the next month or so. You are welcome to. There's no cost right now. It's not for profit, right? So Utah ADHD Collective, if you want to get involved, and then that link that says adhdutah.org/resources, that one it will take you to the page that has that download I mentioned earlier. More specific to ADHD, but it's that download that talks about how does music help with executive functioning? How does, it's that holistic kind of packet. So that packet, this handout, I can send all of that to Kelly as well. And yeah, please feel free to LinkedIn friend me, email me, whatever. We'll keep in touch. Thank you so much. And thanks for letting me talk at you a lot, but also for the engagement and all of your amazing insights and suggestions and questions and everything. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Marianna. This was amazing. I said it would
Good.
be, and I was right. I was right. That's not about me, it's about you. It was really so informative. Such good information and resources. And yeah, as soon as I get that stuff from you, I will send
Great.
it out. I will be sending it out to the people who, have been on the chair, the people who are submitting evaluations. That's the only way I know if you've been in the training at this point. But if you aren't going to submit an evaluation, shoot me an email and I'll make sure I get that to you. So we'll get all of that.
Send me an email as well, so I'll be looking
Yeah.
into it.
So we will be on top of all of this. So thank
Awesome.
you, Marianna,
Thank
for your
you.
time and your expertise. It's been amazing.
Thanks for being
Yeah.
here.
Thank you.
Yep. So have a great month. Utilize this information. Don't forget it. That's what my problem is. I think, oh, what was that about? No,
Yeah.
I won't forget this. Utilize it with your clients and with your families and with yourself. I mean, that's what's so great about it, is that we all know people that could use this. So hopefully you can be with us next month. We'll have another great presentation for you, and be safe out there. I guess that's what all the law enforcement say. So, thank you. Thank you. We'll see you guys in March. Marianna, we leave this open for a little bit just so that people can grab that. So yeah, you can answer or do whatever you want with that. So